2, 1, 2, 3.
So Border Angels. Border Angels is an organization that I had the honor and privilege of starting back in 1986. I also have some brochures in case you didn't get one. You can get one later, and it has a little bit of information, contact information, and so forth. So back in 1986, a friend of mine from the great country of El Salvador, and I know there's people from El Salvador here, she said, Enrique, you're always collecting things and working with the homeless population in San Diego and Tijuana. How about helping me where I live? And I said, where do you live? Her name is Yolanda. I go, where do you live, Yolanda? And she goes, I live in Carlsbad. And I go, Carlsbad? That's a very wealthy area, like this student right here, very wealthy. No, I go, this is a very wealthy area, and I'm just teasing. She's from that area. And I go, this is a very wealthy area. What do you mean you need help in Carlsbad with the home? She goes, yes. So I went up there, and sure enough, there was people living in the canyons. People living in the canyons. And San Diego has great weather and so forth, but to live outdoors, here people do it, which is incredible. Well, there it's the weather is really nice, but still living outdoors. So I went up there and I saw these people living in the canyons, and I said, we got to do something about this. This is the most powerful economy on the face of the earth. And the reason these people are living outdoors is because they work in the fields. They work in the strawberry fields, the flower fields, like the farms that you have here in the great program that Mary Jo and Cornell have about working out with the farm workers. Well, I went up there and I saw these families, entire families sometimes, living outdoors, and it touched my heart. And I said, I want to do something about this, because I'm a firm believer that when you want to have change, it starts with you. It starts with you. Instead of, why doesn't somebody do something about that issue? Well, yeah, you're that somebody. Let's get the ball rolling. So in that particular issue, that particular moment, I said, I'm going to do something about this. And I started going to those canyons, and then other people joined me and so forth. This is in 1986. There was no wall back then. It was a whole different situation. In the early 90s, I moved to Los Angeles. And while I'm in Los Angeles, there was a terrible incident that most of you remember. And it was Rodney King being pulled over by the Los Angeles Police Department and almost being beat to death. When I saw what happened to Rodney King, I did not love that. I hated it. But I did not like the reaction that took place, which was that there was riots in the streets of Los Angeles. I lived in Los Angeles at the time. And when I saw that, I said, we need to respond in a peaceful manner, nonviolent manner. I'm a disciple of nonviolence, like you are. And I said, once again, I'm going to do something about that. So I got together with two friends of mine, Armando Charles and Magda Rojas, and we did a big event at Los Angeles, and we called it Reencuentro, to reconnect. We're all the same race, the human race, that type of message. And I wanted to have a star attraction, somebody that would bring people to the event. And I had invited my friend Cesar Chavez, the co-founder of the United Farm Workers. But sadly, he died. He died. So the show must go on, and we did the event, and his wife Elena came. So Mrs. Chavez came, and when she came up to thank me. We had about 15,000 people at the event. And she said, there's this woman here that wants to meet you. And when I saw that woman, I thought, I've been wanting to meet her. It was Ethel Kennedy. Ethel Kennedy. So to me, another great hero of mine, Mrs. Kennedy. So she asked me, why I kept this work quiet and all this type of stuff. And I said, I just want to do the right thing. And she says, but you can get people to really help you. If you come out in the media, have you thought about moving back to San Diego? That type of thing. So I said, yes, Mrs. Kennedy, I'm going to move back. I moved back in 1994. And 1994 was a watershed year in immigration. 4 things happened in 1994 that have greatly impacted us today. In 1994, you had the North American Free Trade Agreement, or NAFTA, which allows commerce to cross borders between the United States, Canada, and Mexico, but not people. So the big companies of the world, like Walmart, they become bigger, and the people that live off the land, like all of us have in our family history, could no longer compete. Because people working in the farms in Mexico, the U.S. products in Mexico were cheaper than the Mexican products. So these people that lived off the land said, how am I going to survive now? So they started going north. They started going north looking for work. which is something that's been happening since the beginning of time. I could tell by looking at this crowd here that there might be one or two, but I doubt it, 100% Native Americans to these lands. There might be a couple in here, but most of you are of European ancestry. And when your forefathers and foremothers came a couple of 100 years ago or 300 years ago or last week, the U.S. really had nothing to do with why they came. The U.S. had nothing to do with the political persecution that was going on in certain countries or the potato famine in Ireland. The U.S. wasn't the number one power in the world at the time. They had nothing to do with that. And people came. And when people came then, there really was no illegal way to come. People came. Yes, they checked in at Ellis Island and so forth, but very few people were returned. Very, very few people. So back then, there was really no illegal way to come. And the U.S. played no role in why they left their homelands, right? So what happened was, I started seeing what was going on, and I decided that there was something that needed to be done. We did this big event, a reencuentro. We get a lot of attention. Mrs. Kennedy convinces me to move back down to San Diego, and I start dealing with the NAFTA situation. We start dealing with the fact that these people have a right to cross borders, and somebody in southern Mexico, in Chiapas, stands up and said, hey, we have rights too. And that was Subcomandante Marcos and the Zapatista movement. Zapatistas, NAFTA. A third thing that happened was the former mayor of San Diego was then the governor, Pete Wilson, and he was the main voice behind a very racist proposition called Proposition 187. And Proposition 187 was a proposition that would not allow the children, the undocumented children, to go to school or receive health care. You're talking about 5- and 6-year-old children. It's not their fault. Their parents brought them across the border. They can't go to school or receive health care? Even harsher than the Dreamer situation. They didn't have the separation that's taking place now, but anyways, it was horrible. And what happened was Proposition 187 passed in California. It was a state proposition and it passed. But fortunately, some of our friends stepped in, like the ACLU and Peter Shea and other people, and they blocked it. So it was never implemented. But that was the temperament of California, which at that time was a purple state. As a result of that, California today is solid blue, right? Because people were saying this is outrageous. So we have Proposition 187. And the fourth thing that happened in 1994 was in the 1980s, right around the turn of the decade there, President Reagan had said, Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall, the Berlin Wall. Well, in 1994, the United States started building their own wall, Operation Gatekeeper. And that wall is pictured on the front of this brochure. This little girl is standing at the wall. This is what the wall looks like. This is Friendship Park. It's not a very friendly place. There's a wall, and the mesh is so thick that this little girl can't even put her hand through there to shake her father's hand. That's her father on the other side. You could barely see him. And I said, this is insane. So these four things that happened have greatly impacted immigration today. And they're all interrelated. NAFTA, 187, the Zapatistas, and Operation Gatekeeper. As a result of that wall, which they started to build October 1st of 1994, because that's when the fiscal year starts in the US, instead of 1 or 2 people dying every month, which is what would happen before, they would die because they had no legal way of entering the country. For the most part, these people have no legal way of entering. So when people say, oh, they should get in line, what line are you talking about? They don't qualify for a visa. So people would cross before, but not like now. Now that you have this wall, the people that were crossing could no longer cross directly from Tijuana to San Diego like they would before to maybe go shopping or whatever. Now they started crossing in real dangerous areas because the wall covers 1/3 of the US-Mexican border. The US-Mexican border is 2,000 miles long. 700 miles has wall, about 1/3 of the border has wall right now. And that wall is wherever there's cities, San Diego, Tijuana, Matamoros, Brownsville, Calexico, Mexicali. Where there's cities, on both sides there's a wall. So the people will go to the point of less resistance. They started crossing in the desert, the mountains, the river, the canal. And 1 or 2 people started dying every day. It was really sad. All of a sudden, people started dying. And it seemed like nobody would do anything about it. And I was horrified by this. And I said, well, I'm going to do something about it. Not only me, other people did these things also. But I said, I'm going to do something about it. And that something was go out to the desert to put water. I started going out to the desert to put water right around 1996. At that time, as was mentioned, I was in professional baseball with the San Diego Padres. And I would go out, and some of the players would come with me. We'd put water out in the Imperial Valley, which is San Diego is right on the ocean, as you know. As you go east towards Arizona, there's Imperial County. And then after that is Arizona. So in Imperial County, we started going out there and putting water, because there's a desert out there. And we didn't have a name. We were just a group of people putting water out there. And we do it periodically. There was no organized every so often. We would just do it periodically. Well, my last year in baseball was 2001. And I was invited to a very popular show that some of you are familiar with, most of you have never heard of, but it's called Sábado Gigante. It's a Spanish language show. It was the #1 Spanish language show in the history of Spanish language television by Univision, and it's filmed in Miami. And the host is this bigger-than-life character named Don Francisco. So I come out on the stage in Miami, and when I come out, Don Francisco, he says, El Ángel de la Frontera, which means the border angel. And I thought, that's a good name for the group. So we decided to be called Border Angels. And almost instantaneously, we got bombarded by faxes and phone calls. People said what Mrs. Kennedy had told me. I saw you on TV, I want to help. I saw what you're doing, I want to help. Or, I saw you on TV and I need help. My brother crossed 3 years ago, we don't know what happened to him. My mom's still missing, my daughter, things like that. So we said, wow, so the Border Angels exploded on the scene. This is November 2001. And we started growing, and we've continued to grow ever since. In 2005, I formed another division, because on April 1st of 2005, this hate that you see, the neo-Nazis and the KKK, which has been around for a long time, well, on April 1st of 2005, it arrived here in the United States again, and it was these vigilantes with guns called the Minutemen, So I started this group called Gente Unida to resist the Minutemen, to confront them peacefully, face to face, even when they had guns, and non-violently, and we started exposing them. And on February 2nd of 2006, I decided to go from Friendship Park, once again, all the way across the country and let people know what was going on. So I announced at Friendship Park, here we are, we're a faith-based group, we're not a religious group, we're a faith-based group, everybody's welcome. And we're gonna go from Friendship Park to Washington, D.C. in a caravan. A caravan of cars. We have no idea who's gonna feed us, where we're gonna stay. Do it on faith. Do it on faith. We're gonna be gone all month. Now, who can take a month off and just like that take off? Well, 110 cars followed us. We had 111 cars. 111 cars. San Diego to Washington, D.C. We went all across the country. We were in New York City. Went all across the country. So we did this caravan. We went to 40 different cities in 20 different states in 27 days. It was 10,000 miles in this caravan of cars. And we never stayed in a hotel. People housed us, fed us. It was fantastic. So we came back on February 28th, and we held a press conference, and I announced, we've been across the country. We've told people to rise up, to pay attention, and there's going to be marches. There's going to be marches. So I thought maybe 25, 30,000 people would march in total. Well, on March 10th, the woman that was my leader, or the leader for the Border Angels, there was a woman named Elvira Arellano, who was unknown at the time. Elvira, a couple of years later, was the woman that sought refuge in a church and was eventually deported. That's Elvira Arellano. So anyways, in Chicago, which was one of the main cities that we had gone to, on March 10th, they had a march. Because I told them, you choose the date, just go out there and march. You choose the date. Well, in Chicago, it was March 10th. 400,000 people took to the streets. On March 25th in Los Angeles, 800,000. On April 9th in San Diego, 100,000. And then the May 1st marches sparked up again. They had started before I was even born, but they got big. So that spring of 2006, almost 4 million people took to the streets. They're the biggest marches in the history of the United States. It wasn't just because of Border Angels, it was for many reasons, but it happened. The important thing is that it happened. It happened, and we stopped what was taking place, part of what was taking place at that time. Because one of the reasons that we had the march is not only did we want to tell the story about the hate groups and the wall and the deaths, we also wanted to stop another bill that was being proposed by the Republicans, in this case, Congressman James Sensenbrenner from Wisconsin, which was called HR House Resolution 4437. House Resolution 4437 had already passed on the Congress, so then it was going to go to the Senate. And then President Bush was either going to sign it or veto it. We were scared that it would go all the way, so we went across the country. We said, we got to stop this bill. We got to stop this bill. It would do what 187 was doing statewide, but it also wanted to build a wall all across the border. Sound familiar? So we said, no way, no way. So we went, we got the marches going, and 4437 was blocked. It was never implemented. So we decided this Marcha Migrante thing is pretty good. So we continued to do it 9 more years. But only on the first one was it to get people to march. On other marches, we would have other causes, gather stories, register people to vote, expose different issues like the deported veterans. And just a moment ago, I got an email that another deported veteran just came back today. What is happening right now, as you all know, is the worst of the American spirit. There is no country in the Americas that has a wall besides the United States. And there's no country in the world that now separates children from their parents besides the United States, and they put those children in cages. That's what's happening right now, and the whole world is watching. And you know who's watching the most? Our children. Our children, who we tell them our whole lives, don't bully, love your neighbor, treat people with dignity and respect. But they see what's happening. They see what's going on. And too many people are silent. Too many people are silent. Too many people were silent in November of 2016. I was a Bernie guy too, but I voted for Hillary. Well, too many people didn't vote. And look what's happening today. Look what's happening. It's shameful. It is an embarrassment. It's the worst of the American spirit, and the world is paying the price. The world is paying the price. So we need to make change. We've got to get out there and vote in November. We've got to get out there and vote. A lot of people will say, well, I know what's going to happen in this state or whatever. That's fine, but still, there's other races. It's not just for Congress. There's other elections on that ballot. And we all know people in other states. And those of you that can't vote because you're not 18 years old, you don't have papers, you know people that can vote. We all got to participate in the process. Once again, for the 6th time, and this is the first time in a midterm, for the 6th time, it's the most important election in our lives. In our lives. We had an election stolen in 2000. And after that, we've seen what's going on, and we have to, keep on moving on. And this election is very, very important, very important. What we can do is we got to vote. We got to vote, and we got to get other people to vote. And we got to vote in big numbers. And that's why I'm going across the country, speaking to people and doing all these national shows in Spanish and in English and so forth.
So one of the things which was a reflection on how you talk about the work of Border Angels is that on a day-to-day basis, your organization is dealing with a very difficult topic, the topic of people dying in the desert. But yet, you were able to take that reality and motivate people to feel empowered to do something, that each person's actions make a difference. And I'd like to learn more about how to build coalitions in areas. For example, many of the immigrant farm workers who live in upstate New York live in very rural and isolated areas. And in those areas, we also have very rural poor. And so how do you build solidarity? Because what we see right now is that even though the rural poor are not competing for those jobs, there is a kind of sense that these immigrants are getting away with it. And when we talk about getting away with it, what we're really talking about is how do you address poverty? How do you build coalitions among people who experience poverty in the same way? And I'd just like to know how you know.
Well, it's a very difficult situation because both of these communities are suffering. They're having a very difficult time, and their number one priority is putting food on the table and taking care of their families. So maybe doing some sort of events together where there's and it's just some sort of a fun event, whether it's music and those types of things where you can kind of show off each other's culture. The Latino festival, maybe with the country festival. I don't know, doing events where the families get to know each other, because one thing that these communities have in common is family. I was just watching a documentary on the way over here on the plane, and it was about, I think it was Montana, and it was talking about these families that are out there really struggling, and they're farm workers. Mm-hmm. And how they, all the high school kids are saying, I can't wait to get out of here. But then there's always a few that are saying, my older brother got out of here and he came back as quick as he could because, he was lost when he was out in the big city, and he realized the values of these small communities, these farmers, and that's universal, whether it's farmers in Latin America or North America. And it's a situation where maybe there's some commonality, and maybe somehow bringing them together to distract them a little bit for the difficult situation that they're living in. That's why we do a lot of cultural events, the Border Angels. This would not be appropriate in this situation, I don't think, but we do like binational yoga. But something that could be interesting would be, I don't know if you could have some sort of a concert or
So-
I don't know.
We have
Cultural events.
different cultural events. We were having our discussion, the harvest celebration. And it's a time when farm workers from different places, from Mexico, Guatemala, Honduras, Jamaica, come together to celebrate their role in the harvest.
How about the U.S. farmers? Will they ever go to something like that? This is what I'm talking about, is these impoverished families that are out there that are also, maybe doing some farm, or, the hard work that they're doing. I don't know, somehow incorporate them into that.
And one of the priorities among the immigrant farm workers here has been to get access to driver's licenses in New York State. And the campaign is called the Green Light Campaign, Driving Together. And it's a huge issue because of the geographic isolation where there is no public transportation. And undocumented immigrant workers do not have access to driver's licenses. While we know that that would make the roads safer, and we understand the benefits of parents being able to go to their children's school events or to the grocery store or to the doctor without relying on private individuals who give rides at inflated cost. What would you say is important to build support for that among those people who really have a sense that the farm workers are given preference on certain things?
Well, one of the things that we did in California with getting undocumented people to get driver's license was actually a campaign spearheaded by Senator Gil Cedillo. And I remember he promised his wife before she died that he would get that done, that he would get driver's licenses in the hands of undocumented people. And it was quite a struggle. But when we were able to prove, he was able to lead the effort to prove that it makes the road safer, they'll get insurance, they feel a spirit of independence now and not so much dependability. That's very powerful. And one of the campaigns that he was able to get other lawmakers involved and finally pass the bill, thanks to the governor at Gil Cedillo's insistence. But one of the campaigns that we also did was an information campaign to the ones that thought, oh, why are they having these benefits and so forth. And we tell them a little bit about what I talked about today, that we do pay taxes, we do learn English. We bring a lot of great values to this country. We're just like you. I'll never forget with President Obama one time when I was in a meeting, and he said, Enrique, don't forget, before we were us, we were them. I'll never forget that. And I remember I told him, well, I understand what you're saying, Mr. President. Your situation is a little different because you come from African heritage, part of your family. And my situation is different because I come from Mexico. So we never crossed the border voluntarily. In my case, the land was taken. In your case, part of your family was brought here by force. But I got the spirit of his message, that before we were us, we were them. So if we can convince these people that are saying, why should they get driver's license going? Remember, your great-grandparents, it took them a little while to get some of these services available to them. And I think there's a lot of misinformation out there about the services they qualify for now. The number one recipient of welfare in this country is actually Anglo men. And I think when people are thinking, I went to the welfare office and so forth, and I go, yeah, you may have seen people of color, but they're documented, and they're just happen to be on the bottom end of the economic scale. And then I'll remind them, I'll go, when was the last time you saw a Latino on a corner with a sign that says, we'll work for food? Very rarely do you see that. They're actually here to work. So, and they add billions of dollars to the tax system and to the family values. Let's encourage that. Now, you will have some naysayers that you'll never be able to sway. But I think you'll get a lot of people that'll say, that makes sense. That's going to help the economy. It's going to help all of us, and get them to realize that that's good for everybody.
I have another question. It's switching the topic a little bit. In New York State, for many years, there's been a proposal for farm workers, the Farm Worker Fair Labor Practices Act, which would allow farm workers to be paid overtime pay. It has provisions for collective bargaining, and it strengthens the provisions on workmen's compensation and contracts, etc. What has been the experience of California? How has the availability of overtime pay impacted agricultural production in California?
Well, I think in California, thanks to the United Farm Workers and Arturo Rodriguez, who, as you know, is retiring, they've been able to do campaigns, and we have a very strong supporter in Sacramento with Jerry Brown, to make sure that the farm workers are still not paid fairly, but they're paid more fairly than they used to be. And the collective bargaining and the opportunity for them to, to really be treated in a more humane manner has really increased the productivity of these farm workers, because they're dealing with so many issues that right now one of the issues that we're suffering from in California is the lack of farm workers because of Trump's policies. They've reduced the availability of these farmers getting visas. There's a lot of the farms that their fruits and vegetables are left on the field. And I think as the mainstream finds out about this, they're going to say that's going to raise the price of produce, vegetables. It's not a good situation. So once again, people need to see what is really taking place, because they get caught up in the rhetoric that they see on Fox News or whatever, and they're saying, but they don't realize what is really taking place until they see that cost going up. That's why we got to pay these people in a more fair manner. Let them have better working conditions. One of the things when I started my work in 1986, the reason these people were living in the fields in northern San Diego was because there was an affordable housing. And even though there's a law in California that the farmer has to provide housing for the workers, but so what they do is they lease the land to somebody else. Well, that person doesn't have to provide housing. That's the way they get around it. And it's crazy. It's an arrangement between the owner and the person that they're leasing to. That leaser has no responsibility to provide housing. Then the farmers, they live out in the fields. That's not a healthy situation. So through people like the United Farm Workers and other organizations, they've gotten more and more rights, but we have a long ways to go. And I wish you lots of luck out here, because I know that you're doing a lot of great work out here. But it's a tough battle. Even in a friendly state like New York, California, Illinois, where people in general do the right thing when they vote, there's still a lot of people that don't realize the realities of the situation. I mean, you can get those personal stories, a farmer going on and telling a story, that really touches people. Well, Mary Jo, thank you very much for all your great work and what you're doing. You've been an inspiration to so many of us here on the East Coast and across the country. So I want to give you one of our Border Angel t-shirts, which is beautiful colors, and on the back, of course, love always wins, resist with pride.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, muchas gracias. Thank you.
Thank you.
1, 2, 1, 2, 3.